A new season of fantasy football. Welcome back to Techstination. I'm Fred Fishkin. Joining us from Yahoo is Sports Head of Product and Technology, George Leimer. Hi, George.
Hey Fred, thanks for having me.
Well, great to see you. Yahoo is unveiling a new design for its fantasy app for 2024. Give us the overview here.
Sure, we've had three guiding principles that we've had top of mind as we've done this redesign. We've tried to make it easier to play, easier for you to win, which means that you're a better informed player, the best informed player that you can be so that you can win, or at least do better, at least not finish last. That's also a goal for a lot of people, especially now that fantasy football punishments have become much in vogue. No one wants to be the guy in the Waffle House for 24 hours as their punishment. So helping you stay out of the Waffle House, I guess, is a great thing. And also to have a thread of fun and delight and personality through the product and let your personality show a bit. So those are the three things we thought about as we did this.
Well, how popular is fantasy football today?
Oh, it's very popular. There are a number of different organizations that purport to say how many people in the United States are playing fantasy football. The numbers you hear are anywhere from 30 to 50 million people. It's a lot of people, regardless of what number is the actual right number. And it's really come to dominate Sundays for a lot of people. It's the way they experience the NFL. It's the first lens through which they look at the NFL. And that's something that we're obviously very supportive of, and we're trying to, make it easier for you to do that on Sunday.
Well, step us through. I mean, there are longtime players, obviously, but there are those who might be new to it, haven't tried it yet. Tell them what it is and how they play.
Sure. How it works is you pick real life NFL players each week. You have a roster, and that roster has all of the skill positions. It's usually all the skill positions: quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers. There's normally a defense, a team defense that you pick, and a kicker. And depending on how those players do on Sunday in the real NFL games, you amass points based on their performance. And you are matched up against another person in your league. And just like real football, the person with the most points wins. And you count the record up at the end of the year, and there's playoffs, and you play against other teams in the playoffs, and there's a champion, and there's a last place person as well. So that's it's how it works.
And don't people pick pretty much the same players? I mean, the really great players, everybody wants them. So how does this get divvied up?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a draft at the beginning of the year, a big part of fantasy football culture, and we're about to get into the teeth of the season. Is in August and early September, your league sits down and you have a draft. And that draft looks an awful lot like the NFL draft. So the 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 people in your league, there's a person with the number one pick, and the picks go until all the teams are filled out. So in a traditional fantasy football league, everybody has unique players. And across leagues, from league to league, the top players are usually the top players. It's usually a quarterback, or depending on the league, maybe a wide receiver or running back. But within the league, everyone has a unique team. And that's part of the fun of it. You're trying to figure out who are the obvious players that I should pick. If you have the number one pick in the draft, that's normally a fairly obvious choice, one of 3 or 4 or 5 very obvious choices. But where you win the league is how you do in the 3rd round or the 4th round or the 7th round, picking up the person that nobody thought would be a great player, and you get them cheap, so to speak. And again, very similar to the NFL. Tom Brady was a 6th round draft pick. Nobody thought Tom Brady would be Tom Brady. Brock Purdy was the last pick in the NFL draft, and arguably one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, right? So same thing in fantasy football.
What's your thinking behind why this has become so popular? Obviously, you're no longer just sitting there on the sofa watching the games. You're in a sense a participant.
I think if you're a sports fan, one of the things you love to do as a sports fan is show that you're better informed, that your opinion, that your take is the right take. anybody who has buddies at the bar who they watch football with, that's your Sunday is your day when you're full of takes on what's going on in the game, what the coach should do, what player's good, what player's not. This is a way to express that in a way that's fun and gamified. So I think that's one thing. I think one of the great things about the NFL vis-a-vis fantasy is that there's a weekly cycle that is a rhythm and a cadence that is very well known. You look at your results from last week on Tuesday. You start to think about what your roster is going to look like on Wednesday. You set your initial roster for the weekend ahead of the Thursday night game on Thursday. You tweak it on Sunday. You watch the games on Sunday and Monday, and you start all over again on Tuesday. And I think the rhythm of the NFL season that way also makes it a little bit easier to play. It's not as much overhead as with other sports where there's a game every night. And so I think that's part of it. And that's kind of what we've tried to do with this redesign. We've tried to take the functions that you do every week in the fantasy football app. Those are obviously the most important things. Changing your players, picking up players, trades, drops, changing your lineup. But in order for you to do that, you have to have access to the information. So we've brought fantasy specific news front and center in the app. And then the number one thing you do after your lineup is set is you monitor the games. And so you monitor your team, but you also monitor what's going on in the league at a high level. And so we've brought scores to the fore. So in every day, in every case, you're going to be able to get your team, but also what's the most relevant news for fantasy and the scores for all the NFL games.
So, for instance, if you happen to be an Eagles fan, you might be monitoring other teams as well.
If you listen, it's the beauty of fantasy. I think I love being an informed sports fan. And at Yahoo Sports, one of the things that we try to do, not just in fantasy, but everywhere, is make you better informed, make you better educated. And there's no better way to get informed about what's going on in the league than to play fantasy. You have to know the players. You have to get smart about those players. And you have to have an opinion on those players. So sure, I mean, when I'm playing fantasy, I'm playing fantasy to win. And so as much as I dislike a certain team or a certain player on another team, I'll put that player on my fantasy team. My fantasy team is in no way, shape, or form all Eagles.
So, do you have an advantage with the job you have there and playing?
No. Actually, what I learned about this job is that this job, at least for me, seems to be the antidote to actually winning. I think I've won a league once in the 12 years that I've been playing fantasy and also running a fantasy product for Yahoo or other companies that I've been at. So I'm not sure what that is. Everybody asks that question. Oh, you must win your fantasy league every year. Actually, I don't. I also think part of it is I end up playing fantasy against the people that I work with, and everybody that works at Yahoo Sports is really smart about sports. So it's kind of the deep end of the pool in terms of competition.
So, what advantages does Yahoo Sports feel it has over the competition in this space? Because I guess the leagues are competitive, right?
I think the leagues are competitive. I think our single biggest differentiator is we have such great content and such great people writing that content around fantasy. And we produce a lot of it. We produce it in all of the modalities: written, video, podcast. There's something every day. There's some bit of inside information every day that we make available. And again, part of the redesign was to bring that up to the fore. I also think we have some interesting tools. We have tools to help you in your draft, to help you draft smarter, to get that undervalued player, as we talked about, and also tools to help you set and optimize your lineup on a week-by-week basis. I think the mix of it's just a fun game to play the news and information in some of those tools is kind of our winning formula.
Is fantasy football the enemy of the office manager, or should they embrace it? Because I guess in a sense, it can create a camaraderie.
I listen, I think it's great for an office. Every place that I've ever worked, from the time that fantasy became a thing, has had a fantasy league. It's fun. Like anything, when you're working with people, anything that takes you out of the day-to-day work environment and lets you meet somebody in a different way, I think is great. Do I know what the measurement of productivity loss is or whatever? I don't, but I think the benefits certainly outweigh it. I don't think it's the enemy of the office manager for sure.
So where can people go for more info, maybe to get started here?
Yeah, I go to yahoosports.com, and right there, yahoosports.com is our fantasy apps, very prominent there. Just have to click on fantasy. Also download our fantasy app from the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. And I should say that there's a great reason to play Yahoo Fantasy Football this year, especially, and that is we have a contest that we're running with NBC Sports, who's a great partner of ours. And so we have this joint contest where someone, if they join a private league and enter the contest, someone will win $1 million. And so entering a private league gets you an entry into that $1 million contest. And then any player that is on your roster that scores a touchdown in one of NBC's opening weekend games, the Friday night game, the Sunday night, the Thursday night game, the Friday night game, and the Sunday night game, will get you an extra entry into the contest. So one entry just for playing, and then one entry for every touchdown that an Eagle scores on Friday night in Brazil against the Packers. I worked in Eagles reference in there. Will get you an entry into that contest, and somebody's going to win $1 million. So it's a great reason to, if you're not sure where to play, great reason to pick Yahoo. If you want to have an extra league, great reason to stick that extra league on Yahoo.
That's an incentive. So the site, yahoosports.com. George Leimer, thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate it.